Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. I've got an interesting announcement. Our subscriber base is growing, and we're knocking on the door of 50,000 subscribers to the Liberty Report's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ron Paul Liberty Report. So I was going to ask our readers to please share our show and see if we can push us over 50,000 subscribers here pretty soon. We'd be certainly grateful for it.
Well, this is great. I really enjoy doing the program, but we need to produce a product which is popular, and if the people will come, then we can continue to do this. And so far, we've been encouraged because we've been doing this from our studio here in Clute, Texas, Lake Jackson, just a little over a year. So I would say we're doing pretty well, but we think this is very important information. But like I said, I enjoy doing the program because a lot of good comments we get. Sometimes they're challenging, but they're always helpful to read the comments. But today, I want to talk about another issue that's very important. It's an area of the world that we haven't talked about too much at all, and that's Africa. And there are some people who say, well, you better keep an eye on Africa because it's sort of smoldering along. We have an African command now. That's part of our empire, and we're very active in there. But what called attention to it for me was John Kerry. I think he's the Secretary of State or something like that. And he decided to go to Nigeria, and he got permission from the president to do this, to go to Nairobi. And there he met with the president, and he also met with the foreign ministers of Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. And one thing I found out that as that meeting went along was they were all asking for money.
Oh, what a shock.
Can you imagine? But there's a lot going in Nigeria. But the one thing, the first announcement in the news was that Kerry promised, $138 million to go to South Sudan. And what's going on here, I thought we took care of that problem a couple years ago. They were fighting, so we created a new country. But it's not quite so simple. Things aren't going as smoothly as they had hoped. And now they seem to be paying more attention because they're talking about, we have those individuals that run our country have participated in 13,500 UN troops to keep the peace in South Sudan. And they want to increase it. So evidently things aren't going smoothly there. And there was a bit of threatening on here. Kerry was threatening South Sudan. You better behave. You better follow the rules. You've signed this treaty, and you're messing up down there. So he was very emphatic. And he was threatening. He says, you're going to get punished. We're going to put sanctions on it where you won't even allow to buy weapons anymore, and other sanctions. And always behind those threats is the subtle threat of military force, which we're not bashful about.
Yeah, and as you say, people haven't noticed it as much, but South Sudan is yet another U.S. intervention like Libya. It has not produced anything good. It's only produced chaos. The U.S., the U.K., and Israel were destabilizing Sudan for a number of years. Remember, back in the 2000s, there were all of these campaigns about oppression and how we've got to split up the country because the horrible Arabs in the north and the poor Africans in the south, they had to be split up. But, what was really behind a lot of this was the fact that there was a bunch of oil in the south, and the Chinese had built pipelines. As a matter of fact, we have a map that we may even put up, and this explains a lot of the geopolitics around what happened. The oil's all in the south. The Chinese built all the pipelines going up through the north. It was all one country at the time they did this. But the split hasn't done anything. It hasn't created a country in the south. It's simply created chaos in the south. And the Chinese are out there buying the oil anyways.
When they announced this acceleration of activity and more UN troops in there, Kerry wanted to reassure the people, the naive out there, what are they doing? Are they expanding this war or what? And he said, no, what we're doing is we're going in not as a peacekeeping force. That sounds like a pretty good pretext. But no, it's going to change. It's going to protect the civilians and also protect the facilities. So do you think you just pointed out a few of the facilities? The facilities in Iraq were very well protected on our invasion. I remember when Iraq was invaded, the oil facilities were protected, but some of the ancient museums and things that have been there for thousands of years that have withstood all the dictators and the wars of the world, it was confiscated and much of it destroyed and stolen, but the oil wells survived.
They can't even do imperialism right. They go in there, they're going to take all the oil, and they even mess that up. Interventionism doesn't even give greedy people back home anything to chew on.
Yeah. Now, Kerry assured them that the UN and the United States would not be a challenge to the sovereignty of South Sudan. And, of course, we created South Sudan, essentially, so we own them. So what we're doing is protecting our ownership. But he has to say, we will not challenge the sovereignty of South Sudan.
Well, Kerry was also in Nigeria, we noticed, and he was spreading a lot of exceptionalism over there. He promised them, I don't know, how many $1 million in aid he promised them?
Nigeria was promised at least $25 million.
That's all?
But no, it was just a little effort. But it was very important what they were going to do. They want to secure the elections.
Oh.
And they want to make sure there's no shenanigans going on and keep honest elections. And I've been involved in some of my elections, which I really wondered what was going on behind the scenes. And we've known about Chicago, and we've known about the various states that have, we know about LBJ, and, our elections are far from perfect. And yet we're spending this $25 million. But elections over there in countries that we're involved with, even if they gave $25 million in the pretense, the real control of the elections is through the CIA. In this whole thing that we're promoting, this democracy, is so fallacious because, we don't really have a democratic process. We don't want pure democracy, where the majority punishes the minority. But the democratic process is not there. There's the talk about whether third parties will be in the debates. They're not going to get in the debates because the Republicans and the Democrats run the elections. I mean, there's bipartisanship on there. But we're going to have honest debates over there. We're going to take more money from poor people over here and send it over there, and the CIA will run the show, and then it won't work. I mean, we created this country of South Sudan, and the vice president's fighting with the president. That's where the squabble is. So we're going to go in and settle it. So I don't think much good will come from it. But there was an interview made by I think it was a German newspaper or something, and they were interviewing the man on the street interview, and they quote one person. I thought this sort of tells you the story about our foreign policy and how the people in the street think about what we're doing there.
Is this in Nigeria or Kenya?
No, this is in Nigeria still. He was interviewed there. To me, the coming of John Kerry is not something that Kenya should be happy about. Whenever Americans visit or try to be friendly with a country, it always ends up in a disaster. But if he represents the Democratic majority, they're not listening to him. They're listening to those people who run the oil wells.
Well, maybe they can send Debbie Wasserman Schultz down there to fix their elections for them.
There you go.
But the other thing about Nigeria that we'd noticed when we were talking about the whole Africa thing is a lot of military aid is being considered for Nigeria because they've got to fight Boko Haram. This is an Al-Qaeda, ISIS affiliated group that's terribly dangerous, and we have got to commit. This is a new job for AFRICOM, which was created just a year before Obama went into office. But of course, he's expanded it significantly. So we got to go fight Boko Haram. Very important. We're even considering selling them attack aircraft. Although a U.S. official in the paper that I read said, we've been working with them to make sure they can afford it, though. But what's not reported, because unfortunately our press treats the news as if everything just happened yesterday. But the reason the Boko Haram has risen in strength and has expanded throughout Africa is directly related to a previous intervention, and that was the U.S. attack on Libya. after the U.S. attack on Libya, the weapons stores were wide open. They came and they grabbed all these things, and then they went through Africa with all of these weapons.
Well, in the midst of a very energetic campaign where there's a lot of challenges back and forth, have we heard very much about it? Has Hillary been put on the spot to explain that? I think she was Secretary of State when some of this was going on and when the Libya affair was occurring and weapons left Libya. We've heard a lot. Even WikiLeaks has indicated, about the legitimacy of the challenge that weapons ended up in Syria.
Yeah.
But also, probably more weapons went south. Into this region, but I haven't heard that debate yet. It seems like they've sort of missed that. The media hasn't asked her anything about that, so I don't know.
Well, we always talked about how Hillary Clinton weaponized the State Department, which she did, and the State Department then weaponized the whole rest of the world. But I think the whole story of the U.S. in Africa is going over there, creating crises, so that the U.S. has crises to solve. It's like an endless loop.
Sometimes we're pretty cynical here, and I think our audience generally can catch on to this. But isn't this the responsibility of the American foreign policy to spread our exceptionalism? This is what they really believe. This is what they preach. And a lot of people in Congress, know exactly what's going on, and they're militants, and they think we should be the tough guy and the policeman of the world and the military power of the world. We certainly don't want, the Soviets coming back, and we got to watch the Chinese coming back. But then there's the other ones who, are maybe a little more soft-hearted and think that, well, we are wealthy. We have to take care of people. And foreign aid is helpful to people. We should send it over there because it'll help feed people and take care of people, teach them how to have elections. And they believe in this. But I see the problem there is the motivations don't solve the problems. Motivations are very misleading. And the question is, who's paying for this? At whose cost? Let's say they take $138 million and they send it to South Sudan for a problem we created. It's the people who suffer from this are the innocent people who either support it naively or are the ones who don't pay much attention, even if they're not huge taxpayers. They do suffer because this money reflects a financial, fiscal problem in this country that's financed with the Federal Reserve. They create the inflation, the business cycle, and the ups and downs. And these are the people who suffer, and yet they'll just say, well, we have a lot. The government can afford it. But inevitably, when they talk about the government, we should always challenge them and say, yeah, the government will take care of this. The government should do this. But who is the government and who is the ultimate victim from these policies? But it's never... It's never the rich people in this country because, if you're very, very wealthy in the 1%, I'm sure they're smart enough to park their money overseas. So that has nothing to do. We'll just tax the rich, and this whole idea that you just tax the rich and you go about not only domestically spending money with a feel-good attitude, but you go around the world doing it too, and you help the poor people, never asking the question, why is there more chaos in these countries? And why don't they talk to these individuals like this citizen that just said, look, when America shows up, they're not giving us any American exceptionalism. They're giving us grief, and they're creating chaos.
Yeah, and you can imagine for every one of these guys, there's probably thousands and thousands that aren't interviewed. But you said way back in the early 2000s, and you underscored what a ripoff our foreign policy is for the American people. We pay to bomb the bridges in Afghanistan and et cetera. Then we go ahead and pay to rebuild them. But it's even worse because the money we pay to rebuild it never does rebuild it. It just goes into the pockets of contractors that mess things up.
And of course, the amount of money that goes into the war profiteers' pockets, that's an unbelievable crime because it's always, if you don't vote for those budgets, then you don't care about the security of this country. And yet, it's that policy that is the greatest threat to our security, but by us pretending that we have the moral authority to police the world, threaten people, tell them how to run their elections, and we'll do it for them if they don't do what we say. And then if there is disobedience, we threaten with sanctions. And if that doesn't work, there's always the ultimate military threat. And it hasn't worked well. And yet we haven't awakened the American people yet to this. There's still way too many people who sort of ignore this and figure, well, if I'm on the receiving end of some of this, and you know, when I say that, most people think, oh yeah, the poor people, as long as they get their food stamps. But I'm talking about the very wealthy who are in the business, the military-industrial complex, the banking industry, and all the shenanigans going. They're in our universities too, because some of this money that goes overseas, they create studies and things, and they coordinate. And they're required to coordinate some of these studies, you know, with our own universities. Sometimes this money doesn't even leave the country. Mm-hmm. You know, it goes from the Treasury to the Pentagon to some military arms manufacturer. So it's just a shifting of funds, but it's a pretense that we're making the world safe for democracy. Woodrow Wilson claimed that was our role, and it's led to some very bad results.
And, you know, this money and the privileges that the empire, we as the heads of the empire, can bestow upon these countries, you know, it does very well for the very top elite in each of these countries. Cameroon, Nigeria, Kenya, they all do extremely well with this money. We just put up an article on the Institute site about an interview with Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who was a Danish politician who became Secretary General of NATO. And I don't remember the exact quote, but essentially it was this: we need the United States to be the policeman of the world. We want you to keep doing this. If you don't do it, who will? And the fact of the matter is, he has had very high personal success as a servant of that empire, as an elite in his own country. And I think that's not spoken enough about.
Yeah, there's always an angle to it. Somebody's going to benefit from it. And I think exposing that is very important. And, of course, there's a mixing up of our foreign policy now like we've never seen it when you think about the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars involved in the Clinton Foundation being very much involved in our foreign policy. And nobody, well, I can't say nobody, but it seems like there's going to be no true investigation or any penalties for that. But that is certainly a mix-up. We have the CIA involved in our foreign policy. That's bad enough. But now we have this other deep state affair with private foundations to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars that the reporting requirement is totally ignored, and nobody knows exactly where most of that, or at least a lot of that money went, and very little of it went to help poor people around the world. Yet this is what we live with because we accept on policy certain things that can only be financed this way because there's not enough money in the American people's taxpayers' pockets that they're willing to cough up. Just think, I believe there would be very few wars if the people had to pay for the wars. You know, if they had to be taxed or they would loan the money to the government, there wouldn't be very many wars. But when you can deceive the people, lie about the danger that exists, and then finance it in a way where Congress is really excluded, you finance it by just borrowing and the Federal Reserve printing it, it's out of control, and it will come to an end. We're nearing that state, and I think that the American people need to wake up to what's happening in foreign policy. I know some people are saying their eyes are rolling. Why are you guys worrying about those, poor countries in Africa? We need to do our best to help them. Well, there are good reasons. There's geopolitical reasons for this, and there's also economic reasons because this type of policy is a major contributor to the financial mess this country is in. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.